licorice is candy that doesn't taste like candy. Like I feel like licorice is candy for people who don't like candy.
Hello and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. Thanks so much for being here. I'm joined by one Bailey Perkins. Hello, Bailey.
Hello, Andy. This music just makes me happy.
Well, good. It's a good start. This is a roller coaster of an episode I think we've got planned for you today, listeners. Also joining us today is Scott Melson. Hello, sir.
What is up, man?
You know, just a normal, another day in paradise, right?
Or something, right?
Or something. As we were preparing for the show, we all remarked with expletives that there was a lot happening this week on all fronts. America is hitting on all cylinders, or choking on all cylinders. I don't know which one. This week, yesterday, in fact, Thursday, was deadline for bills in the Oklahoma State Legislature to pass off the floor in the Chamber of Origin. Roughly 800 bills total, about 400 in each chamber have now crossed over to the other chamber. That does not include budget-related bills, which we'll get into later in the year, in April and May. That's still quite a bit. So now,
and the short is a lot of bad bills made it off the floor.
A lot of bad bills. Whew, a lot of late nights. A lot of talk about guns, abortion, running over protesters.
And then we had several people do a racism this week. We had a lot.
And don't forget that, we're going to make it harder for tenants and make it easier for landlords to kick people out their homes. So
that's right. And some landlords get tax credits if they were generous. That's actually a good bill.
That was a good bill.
Yeah.
Pause. If you're talking about the one, are you talking about Gann's bill, Bailey? Representative Gann's bill? So I thought the same thing. It didn't actually pass. So it failed, but then the motion to reconsider passed, and I was like, why did they all change their minds? But apparently he did the motion to reconsider so he can bring it up for consideration next year, but the bill is dead for this year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so.
Thanks for that clarification, because I was thinking that it crossed over, so.
I want to go back to Scott's point. Yes, several people did a racism this week, considering the fact that jury selection is underway in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the cop that killed George Floyd. Tomorrow is the anniversary of Breonna Taylor's death. This week, we had a member of the state legislature refer to colored babies on the floor. And then this video from Norman that is right now the top biggest story on the Oklahoman.com website is about this announcer or online announcer for the basketball game or the tournament in Norman openly, just egregious comments.
Well, and the root is that there were players who kneeled during the Star Spangled Banner. And while those players were kneeling, ironically, they decided to talk during the Star Spangled Banner and berate the students, call them an effing N-word, and talk about how they hope they lose and other inappropriate, offensive, and racist commentary, all while the Star Spangled Banner that they allegedly want respect for was happening. So it's just a lot of cognitive dissonance. It's another episode of someone's racism being exposed. And Scott and I were talking before we started recording that about my tweet related to we need a bingo card on racism when people's racism is exposed, because pretty soon we'll hear an apology about how that's not who he is, and we'll hear from people talk about what a good person he is, and especially because apparently he's a business owner who has contracts with OU and other places, and so when those contracts go away and his business starts hurting and he's painted as the person that he is in his community, there's going to be a whole personal campaign on his end to show what a good person he is and how that was just, a mistake. And so it's very disheartening, but especially for the children who were subjected to that violence, right? Because this happened in a public school setting where kids are supposed to be safe and cared for by the adults who are participating in these programs. And for that hatred to be thrown towards them makes me wonder, what else are people capable of doing to our children? So
Right, and that's what I said. Like we got a state legislature using the term "colored babies" on the floor of the state house of representatives, and then apologizing for a slip of the tongue. Okay, slip of the tongue is what happens when you say something out loud that you were thinking but knew that you shouldn't have said. Right? Like that's what a slip of the tongue is. That's like what that saying "I'm sorry for my slip of the tongue" is a way of saying, "Hey, I'm sorry you heard the thing that I was thinking but didn't mean to say out loud." Right? Like that's not he didn't apologize for like having that thought and using that term. He apologized for a slip of the tongue, right? Which to me, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I've never met, what's his name is Bates, right? Was the guy that Bowles was the representative that said that. I've never met Representative Bowles. Maybe that's the first time the phrase "colored babies" has ever crossed the threshold of his lips in his entire life. But somehow I doubt it, right? Similarly, this announcer who used this I'm not going to repeat it. Slur directed toward. Well, I'm not even gonna I wouldn't repeat it anyway, but I'm not even gonna
give it the time of day.
Yeah, like the way that you listen to the recording, the way he said it, it was just like easy, right?
In pure evil, it was rooted in so much anger.
Yeah, like without a second thought. Like this is like it was like just talking with one of my guys. Like this is how I talk all the time, right? And my question, and this was I don't know, my kind of reaction on Twitter for whatever it's worth was like this is just this week two awful things that just happens to get picked up on a microphone, right? How much is being said that isn't picked up on a hot mic? And so because it's not picked up on a microphone, it doesn't go challenged, and because it goes unchallenged, it's then tacitly accepted.
And Scott, you can't challenge something that people aren't willing to be held accountable for. So there was legislation this session trying to prevent the legislature and other entities like at the state level from going through diversity trainings. And there were bills that were trying to prevent quote unquote divisive topics from being taught in schools. And when we choose to overtly prevent these opportunities for unlearning and growth to happen, then we get these instances, right? And people don't get the opportunity to then correct and unlearn things that have become normalized into our culture, right? Our culture as in Americans, because this racist speak is as American pie. And it takes and I'll credit Senator AJ Griffin for this on Twitter. She said, this wasn't, slip of tongue. This is something that has to be unlearned. You have to become anti-racist, right? And so the legislature, I hope, will reconsider their efforts to try to prevent something that they really need. Because to Scott's point, these things are happening all the time. They're just not getting picked up in a microphone. And we've had just two instances that have coincidentally been caught, and we've had public dialogue around it. But if the legislature won't even allow themselves to have the tools to be different, then it's just going to be a hostile environment. And they are accepting that that's what they want.
And also a recognition. I mean, among the many very, very bad bills that made it through the legislature this week, at least on the House side, I have not been following the Senate as closely because, let's face it, I only have so much emotional bandwidth. One of the bills that made it through the House this week was a bill that would allow, if there's a protest that is blocking a street and you are trying to drive your car on the street where the protest is, you can run over the protesters and your you're just free from prosecution because you were fleeing the protest, right? This was in direct response to a guy with a truck who injured several protesters in Tulsa earlier this year. And rather than the legislature saying, hey, what are they protesting and why? Let's understand this and see what we can do to make it better. The response of the legislature is, hey, you know who needs a legal protection is that guy in the truck.
Well, he feared his life, Scott.
I mean,
in his big truck.
But the context is also important here because it's who is protesting, right?
yes.
If this were a MAGA rally and someone ran a truck through it, people would be crying and yelling for justice, right?
Right.
But this is about Black people showing up to protest against police brutality.
Yep.
Well, I remember that a few years ago, a woman drove into the crowd at an OSU football game, homecoming game, right? Or the parade.
Because she was inebriated, correct?
I think so. I have to go back and read the stories, but that was a terrible thing. And I'm not saying that she would have even attempted to claim this exemption if this was law, but in a state where in recent memory we've seen these two things happen, both of which were terrible. It seems like just a knee-jerk reaction to something that's not actually a problem.
Because there wasn't a call for immunity after she did that,
right,
in Stillwater.
And I'm sure they would say, well, she didn't fear for her life, but like this wasn't on the books either. Like if this kind of law's on the books, people be claiming they were fear for their life, whether they did or not, and that's the whole concern, right? And we talked about this a few episodes ago when we had some guests talking about all these anti-protest bills. It's just bananas.
And especially when most people, especially in Oklahoma's protests that have happened around Black Lives Matter, people have been unarmed.
Mm-hmm.
So what ways, if you're in a vehicle, can you fear for your life if somebody doesn't even have a weapon to harm you? So it just doesn't make sense.
I'd say there's also a bill that would make it illegal to block a roadway, right? Well, almost, the teacher walkout, the Black Lives Matter marches, like there's all kinds of things where people block roadways in completely peaceful ways. And also, just because you block the roadway doesn't mean it's aggressive. It is not instigating a riot. It's standing still, right? And if
it's not intended to be comfortable.
Right.
Demonstrations are intended to be disruptive, to gain attention.
Right.
When you look back at the civil rights movement, people shut down highways.
Yeah.
And then people were bitten by dogs so there's a history of like governments trying to intimidate people and harm them for utilizing their constitutional right. And this is just another example in 2021, in the same way people did in the 50s, in the same way they did in the 1900s, of trying to prevent people from utilizing their rights.
Well, we just had the anniversary of the march in Selma, right, for the Edmund Pettus Bridge, in which people walked across the bridge, and for doing so, blocking the road, they were beaten, right?
Yes.
And the fact that we are having these conversations, right, this is not on accident. This is not unrelated, that we open the show talking about recent, this week, very open expressions of racism and white supremacy, right?
This is not a history book.
And there are also bills, that are being supported by some of these same people that would clamp down on protests in the same way as it was done in 1960. We have done this before, America. We have done this before, Oklahoma. We don't have to do it again. We can learn from our lessons.
No, Andy, we don't need diversity trainings. We don't need none of those kind of conversations.
Oh, man. Well, let's get one other piece of bad news out of the way, maybe two more things, and then we'll move on to some good news. We're going to talk about the American Rescue Plan, which is objectively good news for America and for Oklahomans. So another bit of, I will say, negative Nancy news here is that a bill authored by Speaker Charles McCall, or two bills actually, passed the House this week they would deal a devastating blow to our state budget, right? So it's House Bill, there's two of them, 2041 and 2083. One of them would basically eliminate the corporate income tax rate. So corporations would pay no income taxes in Oklahoma, and it would be phased out over the next few years. It would end in 2026.
Because Andy, when we survey people of why aren't you moving your business to Oklahoma, they said because it's the corporate income tax exists.
Right. There is no
not schools that aren't doing well in the rankings, not poor health outcomes or anything like that. It's that corporate income tax.
Right.
Not violent and overt racism directed against high school students.
Right. Well, and of course the governor's like, Texas, they don't have corporate income tax, and that's why businesses go there. I'm like, well, no, Texas has 29 million people. Oklahoma has barely 4, right?
And
4
a
million
hefty
people.
Property tax.
Yes, right. Now, I will
So it's
agree.
made up somewhere.
That's right. The revenue's coming in. People are paying taxes. Corporations, in fact, are paying taxes on property they own. So Oklahoma definitely needs comprehensive tax reform, but we have not seen anybody propose comprehensive reform. We are proposing piecewise things in the wrong order, and it's gonna screw us in the end. So the
good part of that bill is the refundability of earned income tax credit, but it's like a mixed bag kind of bill.
Yeah, so that's the other bill, is that the other bill would reduce the individual income tax rate, personal income tax rate, by 1/4%. And he 100% did this for political reasons, because many organizations, right, have been pushing for to reinstate the refundability of the earned income tax, which they cut 5 years ago due to state budget issues, allegedly. So that piece is only $8 million.
Well, 30, yeah.
Oh, 30, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
What am I thinking of? If this passes, it would, on average, result in each Oklahoma taxpayer getting about $81 back. So you'd pay $81 over the course of the year. So that's $10 a month, like not quite $8 a month, is how much you would save on this. However, it costs the state like $180 million. So the deal is my $81 and your $81 and all of our listeners' $81 get pooled together. This is how taxes work, right? We all pay a little bit, and together it adds up to a lot. And then we can do things like pay teachers and buy school buses and textbooks and fix potholes and all this stuff. But instead, they're like, well, we'll just give it back to you. And I've said before, in my opinion, most folks don't want to pay any more in taxes than they have to. But the problem is that, like, I am not going to substantially notice that $81, for one, because they'll make it up some other way. They'll raise income, sales tax or something. But the fact that they would do this for political gain and just give a black eye to the state budget is a very bad policy.
And it assumes that all of our core functions in our agencies are adequately funded, that they have enough resources to be able to do all the things that Oklahomans are expecting them to do. And when we cut taxes and we get those couple of dollars in our pockets, it then takes away from the ability of agencies to be able to function the way they need to, because that may lead to tax cuts, right?
Right.
I mean, because they have a lot of things they have to think about funding. As we talked about in previous episodes, they could be putting more money in the rainy day fund. They've got Medicaid expansion they still have to pay the state share of, right? The cost of goods are going up. So that means the needs of agencies are going to increase. This is not the time when things are good, because this is a perpetual habit of the legislature, that when the revenue impact statements look decent, they think, oh, that's the time to cut, when we've cut so much over time that we haven't even got back to square one.
Right.
Our schools still have so much need. So why would we talk about tax cuts at this time?
Right. And so, like, to put your analogy a different way, this is like if you had to tap into your savings to do some home repairs after a big storm. something we can all relate to this year. And then a few months later, you've got a little extra money left over. You could replenish your savings because you know there is going to be another storm, or you can blow it on a bag of licorice. And this is what they're doing. They're trying to blow it on a bag of licorice, which is not maybe the most wise fiscal approach.
Can I just take a point of personal privilege, Andy, and ask you, when you have extra money, do you spend it on licorice?
No, but I've been watching.
Like, is that your candy of choice?
I like licorice as much as the next guy, I guess.
Licorice is candy that doesn't taste like candy. Like, I feel like licorice is candy for people who don't like candy.
Well, I can't have too many pleasures in life, Scott. I've got to.
But it also depends on what type of licorice too, because if it's black licorice, it's like why would you need that?
But I will say, I would say a couple of things. I say one, agree 100% with both of you. I foolishly was overly optimistic and thought that, based on some conversations that we'd had on the show, based on conversations that I had privately, that maybe the legislature had learned a little bit over the last 10 years, that they realized that we had gone too far during the Mary Fallon years, we had cut too much, and that maybe, just maybe, overtaxation is not the fundamental problem facing the citizens of Oklahoma. I was really disappointed to see that bill pass quite frankly so easily. Both of those bills passed so easily. We talked earlier in the year that I'm of the opinion, and you guys too, that if we're going to do tax reform in Oklahoma, what it should be is restoring the full refundability of the EITC. That's really, in my opinion, the only kind of revenue change that I would have hoped we'd see this session. I don't know that either of these bills are going to happen. Yes, these are speaker's bills, and anytime a bill is a priority of the speaker, the chances that it becomes law are quite high. But when these were first announced, these measures as possibilities earlier in the session, the reception, to my read, the reception from the Senate was decidedly cool about whether or not we would be looking to cut revenue this year or not. So that's the first thing. The second thing is what we're going to talk about here in a second, that the American Recovery Act, right? Is that the name of it? The COVID recovery bill, Biden's stimulus bill that just passed into law this week. The Recovery Act contains a specific provision that says of the money that is being directed to state and local governments, it cannot be used to cut taxes or postpone tax increases for like the next 2 years. And it can't be used to do that either directly or indirectly. So as of now, the Recovery Act is law. These tax changes aren't. So I don't know if these are tax changes that will be allowed. And if they are allowed, we may have to pay back funds. Or if they aren't active, we may have to pay back funds that the state received through the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So we'll see. I could be completely wrong, and these laws will get signed. These will pass both houses. They'll get signed into law by the governor in May, and that'll be all she wrote. But there are some extenuating circumstances this year. One being that there, to my mind at least, there was not unanimity from the House and the Senate on the wisdom of doing this, number one. And number two, under the Recovery Act, I think we would have to pay back a big chunk of money to the feds if we go through with these tax changes after the Recovery Act has become law. So we'll see.
I think you raise a great point, Scott, that like the legislature is constantly thinking about supplanting, right? And I'm glad that the federal government is thinking about that provision to ensure that we're not robbing Peter to pay Paul in that instance, right? Because the goal of the funds coming to state and local governments is to help support needs related to COVID and things that have impacted communities because of COVID. Not to say, okay, it's time for some tax cuts. Like, that's not why the federal government is providing funds to support the state. And so even from that lens that you said, that means that puts us at risk of even like cutting agencies even further. Or we get ahead in something and then we have to take it back or whatever, find a different way to pay for it, right? And so it's just irresponsible proposals that, like, fingers crossed, I'm praying that they're just political conversations to have the right talking points when it's time to have mailers to voters in this election season, right? And not actual policy, because it can be destructive and be wasteful of taxpayer dollars.
That's right. I mean, if we have to give money back, we may have to, not be able to afford to move the public health lab halfway across the state, or, build shiny things.
The things that are important.
One thing I don't know the answer to, and I don't think we have any way of finding out. I would be curious, and I don't mean to cast aspersions here, and I'm not. I don't know exactly what tax laws apply to banks, if they're any different than any other private businesses. But Speaker's family owns a quite successful and quite lucrative bank in the southeastern part of the state, and I'm just curious how much money Speaker McCall's business stands to personally make or save by eliminating the corporate income tax. I don't know the answer to that, but I assume it's non-zero, and I don't know if there's a way to find that out. But I feel like that should not go unsaid.
Well, and I'll say in a general sense, when we're talking about the taxes that individuals would get back into their bank accounts, people are still going to complain that taxes are too high.
Mm-hmm.
Until it's like no one has to pay any tax dollars and 100% of all money that people earn is in their own pockets. People will always feel like taxes are too high because they're not going to feel relief from a tiny rebate, right? Like, so I don't understand the purpose of even framing the bills as tax relief when people are going to look at that itty bitty check and still complain about taxes being too high.
Right. Well, another thing is that people aren't going to get a check for $81, right? Like, that's the average if you average it out. So the rich people are going to get more money back, and lower income folks are going to get less money back. And when this happened 5 years ago, in fact, this is why Let's Fix This started in the first place, was due to poor tax policy, right? So we had this stupid trigger bill where if the economy grew a certain percentage, it would cut the state income tax by 1/4%, which is exactly what Speaker McCall is proposing. And he did that in the midst of when the economy was recovering.
The oil and gas went.
Yeah, right. So it was like the echo effects from the 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And then as that hit the oil and gas industry, hit us at a terrible time. We made poor decisions prior to that and got us in this bad spot. And back then, I remember, for me, the change in my like taxes was that it saved me $34 a year or $3 a month, right? Like, and I mean, that's like one Powerball ticket with Power Play per month, right? Like, it's one cup of coffee from not
but
even.
If you win, it's super worth it.
Right. Yeah. If only. I'm gonna go 1 in 72 billion chance. Yeah. So these kind of things is the whole point of taxation, right? Is to pool our money in a way. If we could do it voluntarily, wouldn't that be great? That's not how people work, right? So,
but Andy, it wasn't fun for you to hear about teachers having to pay money out of pocket because schools couldn't afford certain supplies, or people having to work 3 or 4 jobs because they weren't getting adequately paid as public employees, right? And those are the consequences of you getting that $3 a month,
right?
in your pocket. Like,
I would wager most Oklahomans are okay paying an additional, $30 a month or $50 a month or $80. I mean, not a month, $30 a year or $50 a year or $80 a year, if it means that our kids have textbooks. If it means that people who are visually impaired and on disability can buy food with their disability payments, right? Like, that was the thing for me with when I scheduled the very first Let's Fix This day at the Capitol, a day at the Capitol for regular folks. I hear Margot, was because they had cut disability payments to blind Oklahomans, and it was going to save the state $4 million, and we needed $1,000 million, right? We needed $1 billion, and I was like, that's a terrible way to do it. So,
Andy, hate to tell you, but I'm quitting the podcast because I didn't realize you were a socialist.
are socialists people who believe in taxation?
Yeah, apparently.
There's lots of capitalists out there that have them.
Apparently you're a
Investment in
socialist.
services.
Apparently you're a socialist. No one told me I'm a red-blooded American, and so I can no longer be on the podcast with you. Thank you. Good day. Also, are the odds of winning the lottery, is it 1 in 72 billion?
I said billion with a B, but no, it's like 1 in 200 and something million. I forget.
Because I was like, if it's 1 in 72 billion, do you know how long that would be if you played the lottery once every second 72 billion times?
I don't.
2,283 years is 72 billion seconds, which is a long time.
That is a long time.
That no one has.
If it's 1 in 250 million, then you'd only have to play the lottery once every second for 8 years.
Only. That's all it would take.
If you played the lottery once every second for 8 years and you won 1 out of every 250 million times, you would win in 8 years.
Well, the problem with the lottery is that it resets every time, right? So like your chances don't get better like subsequent tickets because it's a new drawing. And so
yes.
Yep. Although after like the jackpot is over, I think it's like roughly like $900 million, then like your opportunity cost, like this is what economists waste their time doing, your opportunity cost is high enough that it is worth your time to buy a ticket. So I only play if it's like a jackpot above $900 million.
Agreed. That's my general rule of thumb as well. And people are always like, oh, what? So you 500 million is not enough? And I'm like, no, it's not that I couldn't live very comfortably on $500 million. I could, but you have to do the math.
I'm not going to win. I'm not going to win. And if I'm going to lose, I want to make sure that I lose when I could have won even more.
Yes.
Right.
So right, from policy to lotteries.
That's right. Well, for some people, that's a strategy. I would advise against it, but for some people, it's a strategy. Well, since we're talking about tax cuts and Oklahoma economy, we should mention that Oklahoma is fully open for business. Everyone, all restrictions are out. COVID is gone. It's a glorious day. No reason to be concerned about anything, right, Scott?
Because COVID's over. We hit our 1-year anniversary, and now it's done.
That's right. It just petered out. Just not too old.
You know, it's so hilarious to me because like the governor talks and he's like, Oklahoma is now open for business, but then he'll immediately follow it by saying, actually, Oklahoma's been fully open since last June. Like he'll talk about how like now we're open now, but like really we've been open for the last year, and like that means that we like did it right. And it's like, do you forget that we had like 5,000 cases a day, like not 6 weeks ago? And I mean, it is objectively true that we are in a literally exponentially better place today than we were a month ago. And a month ago, we were in an not exponentially, but a much better place a month ago than we were a month before that. Like that is true. But the idea that like it's over, I mean, there was 445 something cases today. We're at a 7-day moving average of like 500, 600 cases, something like that. As of today, are you guys familiar with the P1 variant? P1 variant, this is the South African variant that has a lot of people concerned. The Brazilian variant that has a lot of people concerned. As of today, it has now been identified in Oklahoma, so it's here. The South African variant is not here yet. The UK variant, we're one of 2 states in the union where we don't have the UK variant yet. But the Brazilian variant is here.
No, we're not. We're only.
But that's the thing. Our surveillance is not nearly up to par. I think you can presume that all 3 of them are here. And do the vaccines work against them? We think that they do. Is it to the same level of efficacy as the original novel virus? We don't know that, and it appears not.
And the efficacy of Johnson & Johnson's only, what, 66%? And so if more people are getting that one, will they have enough safeguard against a new variant?
So one of the things that Johnson & Johnson actually has going for it is that Johnson & Johnson was actually tested in South Africa while that variant was in wide circulation. So one of the things that we know about Johnson & Johnson is we actually have data on its efficacy against the South African variant, and it's really pretty good. It's not quite as good as the original virus, but still really high and 100% effective at preventing severe death and disease. So when we talk about efficacy, it's important to make sure that we're talking about like the same thing, right? Are you talking about preventing all infections, preventing asymptomatic infections, preventing severe infections that require hospitalization, or preventing death? All the Johnson & Johnson, the Pfizer, and Moderna are all 100% effective at death and severe disease, which is like fantastic. Moderna and Pfizer seem to be like 95-ish% effective at infection period. Johnson & Johnson is like 60 something, maybe like closer to 70, something like that, which is still like your typical flu vaccine in a typical year is like 50%. So 70% is still like really, really good, like much better than a typical vaccine for a disease like this. So Johnson & Johnson is still very good. And again, if we're worried about hospital capacity and severe disease and death, then Johnson & Johnson is equally good to the other two, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
The
But we still
problem
don't
is
have enough people that have taken the vaccine, right?
no, but we're close. I think that's what was so frustrating to me about the governor this week being like, "Hey, it's over. We did it. We beat it." You know, he's like, one, the goal was never to have 0 cases. Okay, like I get that now, but like why not? Like why should
the goal is then?
right? Like why should the goal was no cases of smallpox, so we made that happen. I'm not suggesting that we're gonna like make if your point is that we're not going to eliminate COVID-19 as a disease or eradicate it in the way that we did with smallpox, which is the only disease in history for which we've ever achieved eradication. Yes, obviously, like that's true. But then like what is the goal? And I had somebody respond to me on Twitter and say, well, actually, I'm not sure if you know this, but the goal of mitigation was to build hospital capacity. Okay, fine. We've done that, but we are still at a level of disease prevalence where we were at last summer, right? Now, I don't know if anybody remembers what happened after last summer. After last summer came last fall, right? Where we had Labor Day, and then we had football games, and we had Halloween, and we had Thanksgiving, we had Christmas, and we wound up with our hospitals overflowing and people going straight from like BiPAP and Airvo to Comfort Care. Like,
and the difference this time is that the weather is going to feel really good outside, and people are going to want to be out and about, especially like.
Which in some ways is a good thing, right? Because we do know that the virus is not as easily transmitted outside, which is undoubtedly like very good news. I guess what I'm saying is I don't think that the governor's actions this week are going to lead to us in 6 weeks. I don't think in 6 weeks from now we're going to be back where we were 6 weeks ago. I don't think so. But I don't know that. And like the mere fact that it's a possibility, why can't we just wait 6 more weeks until we have another 500,000 people vaccinated? We're much closer to herd immunity, and then do this. Why is it so important that we do it now? And the only reason that makes sense to me is because the governor wants to say that he was the first. Because he's formulating his campaign, his exploratory campaign to run for his exploratory committee to run for president in 2024. And I guarantee you that when he announces his campaign, one of his things is going to be, I kept Oklahoma safe without a statewide mask mandate. We got Oklahoma open faster than any other state in the union. Look how great we did for COVID, right? Like I am convinced that he is making public health decisions from a political standpoint, not a policy standpoint, and that's what frustrates.
The one thing I want to lift too, Andy, before you chime in, is that when we talk about cases and we talk about the virus, like we're talking about like people, we're talking about like human lives, and that's one of my biggest concerns. Is like that is lost when we say we're going to open for business and we're going to completely open. We're going to disregard, public health protocols. Is that we're losing sight of humanity and the people who will be impacted or will lose their lives because we're doing this too early.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with both of you. And I was here waving on the camera here, as Scott said, what is so important that we can't hang tight for just a little while longer? We as humans, right? I feel like particularly as Americans, we are very bad at delaying gratification. We are impulsive, we make rash decisions, and it almost always bites us in the ass. And I'm afraid that's what will happen here, right? Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully things keep going the way that they're going. 2.9 million Americans were vaccinated today, which is a new record. With the Biden administration had a goal of 100 doses and or 100 shots in people's arms in 100 days, 100 million in 100 days, and we hit it in 60 days, right? Like you hit it today. Um, and we're still going, like we're cruising, right? And so it'll only go up. We will get there. And the difference between today and a month from now is potentially like life and death for thousands of people, right?
Yes. And if it is about saving the lives of more Oklahomans, then it's worth it. It's worth the wait. It's worth wearing your mask 6 more weeks.
Yeah, that's right. My mom died. Tuesday will be 3 months since she died, right? And that's gut wrenching, right? Bailey, you lost your grandfather. To be so close, right? My dad has been vaccinated now, and so great. Like, but to get so close, and I would hate it even more, right, for someone else to lose their mother or their spouse or their child or whatever.
Or the suffering that happens, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean, I know someone on my Facebook feed whose father has been in the hospital for at least 2-3 months now, like battling this through the ICU. And then thinking about the fatigue on our medical professionals, that's also who my heart hurts for, is because they're the ones when people went to the All-Star game in Atlanta and went and kicked it at full capacity, door to door, body to body at these parties, or you got these college students kicking it at South Padre or whatever in Texas. Medical professionals are the ones that have to take care of them. Right. And it's a lot of stress on even their social emotional health. And so we shouldn't push our systems to have to deal with it. And we shouldn't force families to have to, and most importantly, people shouldn't have to suffer from this virus unnecessarily.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left. Let's pivot to something happier, right? Let's talk about the American Rescue Plan that passed out. The president signed it. I've seen so many people tweet or post, "Stimmies are coming, everybody. Your stimulus check is coming."
Thank you. It's the American Rescue Plan. I've been saying the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and that's because I've been reading Barack Obama's biography, and that was the name of the 2009 stimulus bill. So, yes, the American Rescue Plan, not Recovery and Reinvestment Act.
And it has a whole lot of stuff in it that's going to help support Americans during this stressful time. There's the stimulus checks that will go out, $1,400. There's the for child relief. So if you have a child who needs to go to a child care center, I think it's like up to $3,600 a child. There's boost to the earned income tax credit. There's strengthening of the PPP program for small businesses and other businesses that may need support during this time, for those loans that will be forgiven if you keep people on your payroll. And it's been extended to ensure that sole proprietors have the ability to access the PPP support. There's dollars that will go to state and local governments for continued COVID relief and prevention efforts. There's a lot of nutrition provision. So the space that I work in, there's a boost to SNAP, because SNAP has been inadequate for a long time, like $1.40 per day per person. And so now there's a 15% increase to that. There's going to be monies towards programs and nonprofits like food banks and YMCAs and other things that serve kids and families. And so it's a very robust piece of legislation, 1.9 trillion, that's going to help every facet of this country.
Yeah, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. It's passed on mostly party lines out of both chambers. None of Oklahoma's Congress people or senators voted for it, with a vocal complaint that not everything in it is COVID related.
They
Now,
specifically said only 9% in their viewpoint is specific to COVID relief.
right, and if you look at it, I don't know how they got that number, like, because COVID has touched literally every aspect of our lives, right? And it is always a little disconcerting to me to, and this is, I guess, politics in 2021, right? But like, to make these hardcore party line stances and grandstand on things that is good for people, and people that are hurting, right? This supports not just individuals but systems and cities. And Oklahoma City Mayor Holt, we talked about this last week or week before last, was on TV on national news saying, like, we need this. This is a big deal. Like, we have businesses here that are hurting. We have city resources that are exhausted.
And it would have been it is the record amount that's been sent to the city of Oklahoma City.
Yeah, right. It's a big deal. I mean, they went through those grants to businesses and stuff quickly the last time, right? Like, this is stuff. And even though things are looking up, cases are down, vaccines are up, the sun, it's warmer outside, things are looking up, but we're not there yet. And there's a lot of damage that happens, right? So, like, anyone you've had a deep gash in your hand, right? And you put a Band-Aid on it or press it to stop the bleeding. That's the first part, but the wound is not healed. You can't just take the Band-Aid off and go rub it in the dirt. It is not going to magically heal itself, right? And so we've got to, this is medicine to help it heal, right? Like, this is the stuff we need for that longer, slower healing process.
Absolutely. Especially for the economy, right? So when we're thinking about the direct payments people are going to be receiving, the other thing I forgot to mention was unemployment was restored. So those additional federal supports for those who are in between jobs, you'll get that extra $300. And that's the reason they were so urgent about getting this bill passed, as the deadline for the unemployment piece was about to expire. And so when you're looking at those dollars that people will be receiving, a majority of them are going to go back into the economy. People have to catch up on bills, right? Because there are a lot of families who got behind on rent, or they got behind on whatever the need is, right? They're going to be spending it on making sure their refrigerators are stocked to be able to feed their families nutritious foods. They're going to be spending it on getting those tires fixed that they've needed to get fixed for a long time so they can drive to work, right? So those different pieces of our economy that have been struggling, those dollars are going to go right back in. And so we're going to see that impact for to help us get out of the economic downturn more quickly, because we're stimulating Americans who will then spend it on the things that they need.
Yeah, like I know someone who it's a family, several kids, husband, wife. The husband does delivery for a beverage company, and so his work has been down because people aren't traveling as much, so people aren't stopping at gas stations and grocery stores to buy a drink or whatever. And then the wife worked in the service industry, right? Like restaurant kind of thing, also hurt. And so those kind of family, like, this is just a regular American family. They work 2 jobs. They got a bunch of kids. They're trying to get by. And this kind of deal is a boon to them, like, helps them stay afloat. In this instance, the wife left her job because it didn't have enough business to support her, right? So she lost her job. They got a car payment. They got kids in school. They're trying to get by. If one of their cars breaks down, they're toast, right? If an appliance goes out, they're toast. They've exhausted all the resources trying to get, adequate supplies for their kids to do homeschooling. And, like, they're back in school now, but it's still, like, for folks like most Americans that live check to check, and suddenly one of those checks is gone or greatly reduced. Whatever savings that they had saved up is gone. And this is the difference between them having to lean on family to help out, right? Like at some point, I mean, and I'm always happy to help out my family, but we can't all just do that. Like eventually we'll all be tapped out, right? And like the community, the state will be tapped out. And so we need these kinds of resources to come in to help get us over the hump.
I also think this bill, and this is getting a little bit like meta, I guess, but I think that this bill has the potential to be a turning point in American politics, and kind of represent a paradigm shift from the paradigm that I think all of us have grown up in. And I'm kind of referring to the life in politics that existed from Ronald Reagan onward, which was this idea that, one of Reagan's most famous quotes is, the most terrifying thing you can hear is, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help." Or saying that, like, government's not the solution to our problems, government is the problem. This bill, and I think particularly the way in which the bill was passed, is a fundamental rejection of that thesis, right? This bill is saying, you know what, government can help. Government can help put money in your bank account. It can help you, give you a way to deal with that emergency that you're unprepared for after the last year. It can help you with extra money for childcare for your kids. It can help you afford the healthcare that you need. It can help you with extended unemployment benefits while the economy recovers. Government is here, and government can do big things to help people. And it's because it is so big and because it is so far-reaching. And I will be the first to admit, not everything in this bill. I mean, on the one hand, if you want to make the case, which is completely legitimate, that like COVID touched everything, so everything is COVID related, I think that's a completely legitimate like case to make. Is it also true that there are things in this bill that have been priorities of Democrats for a long time, regardless of COVID? Yes, that's 100% the case. But the fact that they went ahead and did it, and they did it fast, right? One of the things that I think made the ACA the political hot potato that it became was that they spent like 16 months debating Obamacare, and you had these town halls, and you had these like, and tweaking, and this. They didn't do that. They said, you know what, we're gonna get a bill on the president's desk in 6 weeks, and they did, and didn't give really anybody time to like galvanize a movement against it. And now starting this weekend, people are going to be seeing checks in their bank accounts, right? And I think that has the potential to frame the way a generation of Americans looks at government. And I don't mean becoming dependent on government. I don't mean a generation of people who live their lives expecting a check from Uncle Sam every week as the way that they pay their bills. But I mean a generation of people who, instead of looking at the government with skepticism, look at government with hope as a place that can solve big problems. In this case, it was done really with just the input of one party. But I think if you see that kind of a sea change in public opinion, you will start to, I hope, get cross-party buy-in on the idea that government can act as an arbiter of solutions and not just a harbinger of more problems. And so I know that that's kind of bigger than like, what does the bill do? You guys did an excellent job summarizing what the bill does, the concrete benefits, but I think that because of the concrete benefits the bill provides, it may have a bigger and more far-reaching impact. And I'll be frank, I hope that it does.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I think to Scott's early point there, we will be seeing potentially, right, this shift in if the government lives up to their pledges, right? And if they really deliver on these things where they can make people's life better, as they did throughout history, right? FDR and all that stuff, and many, many other examples.
There you go with the socialism again.
FDR was a socialist. He's a good American, and you know it. Listeners, if you ever had the pleasure of visiting our nation's capital, I implore you to go to the FDR Memorial. It is my favorite memorial. It is incredible. I'm always sad when it's in disrepair, as many things are. But if you can go when the fountains are on and you walk through all 4 of his terms, I see all of his quotes on the wall. It is mind blowing. All right. That aside, in 2 weeks, I believe the U.S. Senate will be taking up the For the People Act, which I think will be the next really huge demonstration of what the government is capable of doing, right? So we'll talk more about that as we get there. But for now, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thanks for being here, you guys. Scott, thanks for being here.
Wouldn't miss it unless I have to work.
Well, that's fair. Bailey, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andy.
Listeners, thank you for being here as well. We'll be back again next week. Please stay involved, and remember, decisions are made by those who show up. Have a good week.